Welcome, everyone. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking about the future of work, but not just like the typical future of work discussion. We're going to talk about everything about the growing organization, how to manage organized teams, how to grow scale teams remotely in different parts of the world, all those little topics. We're going to go into a deep dive with two great friends, Giovanni and Mattias. Now, I could introduce you guys, but it's always more fun when you guys introduce yourselves. So Mattias, I'll hand it to you first. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to what you're doing today.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for having us here today. So yeah, just a little quick on me. I'm actually a product of being a child that moved around a lot with my parents working at the UN. So I traveled the world as a child in Kenya, India, Italy, France. Then went to university in Canada, and then ultimately did my master's in Sweden, and then ended up here in the UK. So it's been incredible, to be honest, to be really here in the UK for the last 20 years, because the first 20 years of my life was very, very different. So I started working in venture already just after the first crash. So that was in 2000. And the world was just such a different place. European tech was really, really small. Outcomes of 10 to 20 million were considered incredibly big outcomes. And so that was I loved it. I loved the innovation. I loved working with entrepreneurs, and felt super lucky to be involved. But it was scorched earth after the last crash. It was really, there's not much going on. And then I ended up meeting up with Nicholas, who was pitching me his business Kazaa, and I decided not to do that. And then it turned out that we ended up building a business together, which became Atomico. And so I was pitching him the concept of Atomico. He was sort of thinking what he wanted to do next after Skype. And that's really, how it started. And so I then built up Atomico while Nicholas was doing his earnout. And, I did that for 2.5 years. And then he came on board, and then we raised an external fund, and we built lots of other funds. And I had the opportunity to work with lots of great founders. And it was a wonderful 13-year journey at Atomico. And then now, I've decided to build my own firm with Moonfire and focus on the seed stage. And it's kind of funny because when we started Atomico, we focused on seed and Series A. And in those days, again, a really solid Series A was between $1 and $3 million. And today, that is very much the definition of seed. So it's good to be sort of focusing back at that stage of backing founders at the beginning of their journey, which is what I really enjoy doing the most. And and so it's been a really exciting time, and I think it's a perfect time to be building a firm at the seed stage in Europe, because I feel that the other parts of the ecosystem have been built out and are getting a lot of attention at Series A and B. But I think for us to have a really healthy ecosystem, it's about that early stage where you need a whole bunch of different types of investors that are supporting the next generation of founders that are coming from all of these great companies that are being created today. And we have over $100 billion companies. And for example, when we started Atomico 13 years ago, there was one. And so there's been a big shift here. And in those years, by the way, I did sit on the board of Seedcamp, was a first board member there. And it was so fun to sort of see the forging of the firm, and what you've become has just been so impressive. So congrats to all the success of Seedcamp.
No, I appreciate it. But before we transition to you, Giovanni, so we can hear your background, I just want to ask you one last question, Mattias, in the context of the chat we're about to have, which is, you've worked with many companies over the years. What is the range of employee count that those companies have had? Because I think that's going to be a critical part of what we're going to be talking about once we get going.
Yeah, it's really from 1 to thousands, that I've been working with. And then, the interesting thing too is the relationship between the number of employees and revenue, which has also been very, very different. Work with some companies that have a lot of people employed and the revenue is just coming. Whereas you had something remarkable that was happening at Supercell, where I think when we went in, they were 20, 30 people. By the time they exited, they hadn't grown much. We're maybe heading towards 80, but they were doing billions in revenue. And so they kept that tight culture, and they kept the ability to be flexible and dynamic. And it's interesting, that talking about that, I think Ilkka is one of the most impressive founders I have met and leaders. And he always says that he's the least powerful CEO in the world, and I just love that comment.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a very good quote for leadership right there.
Yeah.
Because that opens up quite a bit about what culture and leadership should be like. And on that note, Giovanni, let's hear a little bit more about your background, what led to the creation of Humaans. Just tell us your story.
I mean, thanks very much, Carlos, for having me. Generally appreciate that. In terms of background, I was born and raised in the south of Italy, so super tiny village, 15,000 people. Then I moved when I was 18. I graduated in Milan, and then at 22, I moved to London. It just was something that clicked for me. London was just a special place to start a career, I thought, but I had not really kind of good understanding of what I wanted to do. I started working with a couple of small agencies, and there was kind of a natural path when you're coming from communication design. I quickly realized that that was not really for me. The thing that was kind of not really fascinating was sometimes there's just this focus on the speed of the execution and not the ability to kind of bring something across the entire life cycle, if it's a product or a piece of communication or anything. So that's where I started kind of venturing into the startup ecosystem. And I started my first, it was a kind of relatively large startup back then. It was Jawbone, kind of going pretty fast when I joined, and it was really exciting journey. And I spent a couple of years there, learned a lot, and then from there I wanted to try something entirely different and to join a company that was like 10 people in a room. So Jawbone back then was close to 1,000 people, and then I joined this tiny startup, 10 people, raised like a really strong Series A. I think was one of the largest back then in Europe, and saw the company going from like 10 people in a room to kind of 60 people in just a few months. So there was kind of really, really interesting working close with the founders and learning a lot. And then from there, I was focusing on the product side of things, product design, and then obviously on the consumer mostly. And then I say, okay, I want to try something now which is different. This B2B space looks extremely exciting. There's not lots of love put into B2B technologies, and then Qubit is something that then kind of materialized as an opportunity, and I had the opportunity to work really, really close with the founders there. And for me, it was just a kind of a phenomenal experience, a good trajectory of the company. And that's where I met my co-founder, actually, Carlos. Carlos was leading the engineering team at Qubit. There's something that clicked. He actually hired me then, so he interviewed me at Qubit. So it was kind of an interesting thing, and the fact it was like really heavy on the engineering culture, but it was not a lot on the design side of things. So for me, it was again building up, ground up design at Qubit, and from there, obviously we managed to accomplish a lot with Carlos, and there was this great synergy. So we thought, okay, maybe we should do something together, and we were kind of exploring options, but there was something that was really kind of something that clicked for us, and it was the fact that as a kind of sophisticated product and engineering function, we always use the best piece of technologies, products that can help you move really, really fast. And then we look at the landscape of other kind of teams and what they were using. Like, you see beautiful product in sales, beautiful product in marketing. But when you look at the landscape of HR products, everything was kind of, a little bit painful, I would say. Like the fact that as a people managers, we had to interact with a bunch of tools, and it was something that wasn't right. Product was slow, clunky. We thought, okay, this is interesting because actually you need this piece of software. Like literally every single company needs a piece of software to manage employee data, to manage their staff. Why there is not lots of love put into this type of technologies? And that's something that kind of educated a bit of the strategy for Humaans. But there were two main observations that kind of help and kind of shape more of the vision of the product. The first one was the market dynamics, and the fact that we're players focusing on the long tail of SMEs with all-in-one type of solutions. They were not necessarily really sophisticated and not scalable. And then you go on the total end of the spectrum with players like SAP and Workday. They're just really designed for massive corporations. So there was basically nothing in between to help companies grow and scale from like a few hundred to kind of a few thousands and more employees. The other aspects that was really interesting was the adoption of point solutions across basically different aspects from the recruitment and more. And that basically helped us say, okay, there is something that's missing and something that we could basically bring together to generate automation, business velocity, and more.
Right. So let's on that point, you brought up a very good point, Giovanni. And I want to go deep dive into that for the next few minutes, which is what are the dynamics when you say that there's on the one end this long tail of SMEs, or on the other end there's this big corporation, and there's nothing between hundreds to a few thousand employees. And I know that Mattias earlier were talking about Supercell and some of the companies. Let's talk about the problems of those companies, because I think that's the key point of this episode is talking about what are the kinds of problems that a CEO and a founder will be facing, where not only will it be a platform play like what you're building Humaans for, but like just for them to know what to expect, what's normal, what's not normal. Whoever wants to take it first, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in. Like the first thing that we observe is basically the needs of a company are changing quite rapidly when you go through the phase. So something is working when you've got 100 people. It's not necessarily going to be the same thing when you actually have 200, 300 people. And they can be the way you run a performance management cycle, the way you run hiring process, the way you do engagement with employees. So this means that you need different support from a technology perspective to kind of scale the organization. So this is something that is like for us was really, really interesting to see. This means that you need to change your stack, you need to reevaluate your priorities. And the other aspect which is really interesting is that the fact that
I'm going to push. Yeah. Keep that thought, Giovanni. Keep that thought, because we haven't finished the list. But I want to pick out on a couple of those points.
Absolutely.
Some of those are very emotional points, and there's an argument to be made that they're either platforms that are specialized in that. I've seen tons of companies, I'm sure you have as well, Mattias, companies that are specializing just on like hiring or just on performance management because it's such an emotional tide. Is there really a promise that we can ever meet where one technology solves all that? Or what do you think? Is it organizationally, is it not just about all these changes happening, but also tons of new tools being added to, like you can't help that? What's your opinion there?
I mean, I think we're kind of underestimating the changes that are happening in the people space. So let me just pull back a little bit, maybe, and talk about the story of a little bit of how Humaans and us met. Which kind of it could be an interesting story too for you. So I was introduced to Giovanni by one of our portfolio founders, Pento, who had in the payroll space. And they said, look, you should meet them. We're using the service. We think it's great. And we think they've got something here. And so that was obviously a great reference. And so things moved really, really quickly, for us and in our conversation. But it's interesting too, that it comes from another person who works also in the sort of HR space and sort of defining and solving a specific problem. And I think there's, in terms of thinking about, what's happening in this space, and that we're moving from this thing of being a HR as Giovanni has talked about, HR as like a certain specific administration task to something that's actually taking over, large parts of the organization in terms of integrations and relationships. So they're not sitting in a corner; they're sort of part of everybody's development and culture development. Sense of purpose, all these things are becoming something that's so important for that sort of function, which is now like really a people and talent development function. And I think that to think that there's one service that's going to solve everything, I think is not thinking far enough of what we can do in each one of these areas, which is huge because the impact to the individual can be enormous. So, like that's what got us excited in terms of like, okay, so this is something that, another point solution within the HR space is sort of seeing as a broader solution that's helping them sort of navigate this new world. So, I think we're going to see a bigger shift now where we're going to be seeing more point solutions. And it's also working on a mega trend of building software on top of software. And I think that's allowing also companies to grow faster than ever before and provide quicker solutions, better integrations, and faster deployment.
Something that I want to...
Yep. Go ahead, Giovanni.
Yeah, something that I want to add is also related to the composition of different organizations. So if we look at companies that are scaling and growing with a more kind of distributed setup, they have specific needs. They're also related to kind of, compliance challenges as well. So if you're operating, let's say, in the UK and Brazil, maybe the same applicant tracking system is not going to work because there are different aspects that you need. Or from a payroll perspective, obviously payroll is a super interesting space because it's extremely highly regulated. So you need something that obviously is bringing together all the different pieces of technology that you are using kind of, in a way that is not all in one, but is all together, right? And that's what we're trying to do, basically bring everything together to provide this business velocity while providing the flexibility you need to scale the company in the way that best works for your specific setup.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, if I had to paraphrase it, it's not about doing the job of all these tools like a Swiss Army knife is all the tools, but none of them are particularly good. It's about having a good overview of all those tools and then bringing it together so it makes more sense. Because as you were saying, Giovanni, things are changing so quickly that going from 100 to 200 to 300, you need to be able to track that change, not necessarily have a tool that evolves with that change. You might be replacing tools. But I cut you off with some other of the other challenges that you see when companies scale. So if we rewind back to that, we're talking about some of those elements, and you had a few more ideas about what changes you see in companies between that hundreds to thousands of employees.
Yeah, there's obviously the aspects around, again, technology that you need to manage process, and that can be, even if we tap into, I don't know, the way you run performance process, the way you run an onboarding process, the way you run, promotion as well as tapping into the culture and then retention piece. Obviously, companies that are much smaller, they're not sophisticated. They can operate in a way that is, really fast and sometimes don't really pay attention to some of the impact of these processes. Versus if you have, 500,000 employees and you're running kind of a performance review, you need to make sure that things are really, really solid and fair and inclusive for the entire organization. This means that you need a different type of setup and a different type of, tech stack to support you with that. And at the same time, you need basically to leverage a different data set that is obviously larger and is really comprehensive in order to make decisions that can help you build a better place of work. And that's something that, we try and build technology to facilitate that as well.
Okay. Well, what's really interesting about some of these points, Giovanni, is that, I'm a very big believer that technology only amplifies what the humans, I love the name of your company. The technology only amplifies what the humans are willing to do or what are willing to inject. And so much part of that is the culture that the founders set in evolving that and evolving that into like a process that then can use tools to use it. And so, Mattias, maybe to you, a question is, you hear some of these anecdotes Giovanni is sharing about elements of the company that need to change quickly, not only from a tools perspective, but just culturally, adapting, delegation, hiring, diversity, culture. Like, how do you find founders that can adapt to that and that are not going to be what do you look for in a founder that gives you an idea at the seed stage that they're going to be able to embrace that change that Giovanni's talking about?
Yeah. It's essentially, I think, to be able to discern that from others is that just how quickly they react to changes and the ability to aggressively think differently given new information that they have in front of them. It's also, I think, a product of the type of people they also like to surround themselves around. I think that's also super helpful to sort of think of, if you're seeing a little bit of a monoculture, then you're wondering, is it somebody who is comfortable with, ambiguity and having to change very quickly. So I think those are some really good indicators. But ultimately, when you're looking at when you're in the company, you can really tell the difference, when you're working together with them, is of how quickly they can change and be able to distill, what is the new norm, what is the new benchmark, and not sort of have hangups of what they see the old world to be, because I think that's the real power of being able to imagine and see, what is possible and what we can do. And I think that there are a few founders that, or people I would say in the world that are, incredibly good at always being able to be just a couple of steps ahead there.
Well, that's a good segue. If you assume that somebody has those attributes, and which actually line up with the attributes that we look for in founding teams, that a large part of where that hits the road is the go-to-market. It's like as you built this product and it's amazing, it's exploring that customer. And so, Giovanni, maybe you can share with us kind of anecdotes, because I think the target market that you're going for is a hard one to crack, right? And you're asking them to trust you with, a core part of their human operations. And so it's not only hard to find those customers, but also to convert them. Maybe what tips do you have for listeners that are trying to engage those very same customers? Maybe not specifically what you're building, but just in general, how do you crack open that go-to-market for that segment?
There are two main observations there. One, and is basically the reality of the market that we're in, that is extremely competitive and it's tough. And as a founder, you need to kind of accept that you're going to be dealing with some sort of level of rejections, right? And that's totally fine. And specifically this is related to the point that Mattias mentioned around being able to kind of adapt and adjust and accept. I'm coming from a product background. I'm not used to lots of rejection. So now when you actually transition into kind of sales role and try and be kind of aggressive in getting kind of a step into the door, that's is something that you need to learn how to face. The other aspects based on this conversation I have with companies and prospects is that there is lots of element of trust that you need to build, as you mentioned. Is more kind of a consultative type of approach that you need to implement as part of the sales process and the cycle. Just be there, listen, try and absorb as much as you can. Ultimately, when you try and sell into people ops, HR, and talent function compared to, I don't know, DevOps, like, is it a really different type of transaction? Like with kind of very technical teams, is a pure transaction where they don't want to waste time. They know exactly what they need. They don't want to see if you have a specific solution for the problem. Versus future of work, things are changing so much that as a company, you don't know, you kind of have an idea of what you need today, but you don't know what you might need, in 18 months, 2 years down the line. So you're basically embracing this journey of trusting the provider that can provide you with some sort of support and help and technology, can scale with you, can grow with you, can change with you as well. So they want, to basically be listened and you to have some sort of kind of, presence and be really, really close to them.
Can I just also go back? I mean, like, a little bit on when we got involved with Humaans, what was so impressive was how quickly they were growing. Like you say, it was so complex, but the amazing story, I think, of Humaans, which I think is so much of the era that we're in right now, in terms of a new age of European venture and technology. So we're a new fund. We just launched our $60 million fund. We're speaking with Giovanni, and he's telling us about what he's doing. We quickly move. He then gets accepted to Y Combinator. He's quickly just two people signing up customers really fast, because he's actually, like I said, building on top of other sort of softwares and making quick and agile integrations and automating those processes as much as he can. And he's fueling that growth. And then they are raising. They're getting loads of interest into the company post that, and ended up doing another round pretty shortly after that. Most of them being investors coming from the US. So a whole host of top tier names being interested in this business, and all the while he's just still slugging away, bringing in new customers. And I think having that approach of, there's a whole new world that changed in front of us right then, right? So, he's working in a completely remote world. I'm working in a completely remote world. And then what you're doing is you're just looking at where the gaps are in that market and how you get, how you're able to do and achieve what you want to achieve, in a way that maybe has never been done before. And I just think, I really do believe that Humaans is a unique example of our age, and I think there's more companies like them out there that are doing exactly the same thing. But and they're the ones that are being winners in this new sort of post-pandemic world.
I want to touch on a point you made there, Mattias, about the unique times that we're living in, opportunities. I mean, I think if I dig a little deeper on that one, and Giovanni, feel free to comment on this. The last year has been an interesting time for people to receive inbound sales offers, right? Yeah. Like if you're a founder, you haven't really had to travel to close a deal, which is helpful, right? In some cases, it reduces costs. And it's been, in some cases, easier to get meetings, in other cases, more difficult. And so I guess I just want to hear maybe some anecdotes about how you guys think fundamentally go to market for early stage companies selling enterprise sales type products is different. Like what advice would you give to somebody listening to this who's now, we're now coming out of lockdown. There's going to be a sort of a hybrid approach to meetings in person, and just in general, like what are the best methods? Is it just LinkedIn scouring, or is it, maybe some tips and secrets there? And Mattias, maybe anything that you've seen from any of the other companies in how to get those early beachhead customers?
What I think is so interesting is that I think that companies today are more interested than ever in trying new services and technology. So I think, today it was almost like, it's almost normal for you to be signing up lots of customers after having launched after a few months, whereas before it was like something you had to wait like, a year, like, okay, it's going to take forever. But I think everybody has sort of bought into this concept that we need to be trying new things. We'll start them at slow, maybe a smaller scale, bring them into the organization, and then add that onto our sort of set of tools. So the world is changing in front of our eyes. And we're seeing also companies do really cool things. They're getting people to try and test early on, maybe before the product is 100% ready. They're then able to sort of change, what they're doing to then be a little bit more bespoke for this problem that maybe customer has, and thereby further building their product and making it even more what becomes then a more scalable product that's fit for purpose, even better. And to me, like a lot of people, I think there's also this conversation of, should we have direct sales? Should it be inbound? Should it be outbound? Should it be you just let people come in and sign up themselves? And I think it's constantly mixing these different solutions. Today I'm definitely not a proponent of not having a sales team. I think sales teams can be super powerful of driving any part of your sales. And a lot of that personal relationship becomes important. And we forget sometimes that, and you talked about this, the human element. Technology is technology. Technology doesn't always understand human beings, and we need the human element. And so our partners are technology. We're gonna be moving into an era of artificial intelligence where our colleague is pretty much going to be software, right? But there's things that they can do, and there's things that that are great, and there's things that we can do that are great. And I think there's going to be a much deeper partnership there, and we're going to realize the importance of the human element in what we do and how we leverage that.
Cool. And Giovanni, maybe you can comment on that with regards to how you did that at the product level, because not only were you having, look, when you're having these chats with these companies, you're not only trying to convince them to look at your product and sell into it, you're trying to get them to think about their internal human processes and then leverage best practices. But on top of that, it sounds like you're also asking for product integrations, or at least visibility on existing tool stacks and tech stacks. And so, that's like the ultimate trust factor right there for any company with a new startup. Just maybe how you've navigated some of that. Like, what are the biggest challenges you've had in getting a company scaled up to where it is today?
I mean, a few things that are related to the go-to-market. Something that is wrong, in my opinion, and the perception is specifically when you're building a sales function, is always about, you need to make sure that you have really, really big top of the funnel. It's kind of, it's maths, it's pretty straightforward. But we tried a couple of experiments with large top of the funnel, and we noticed that there was not necessarily the best way for us. But then we noticed that if you try and stay highly kind of segmented, that's, the results are much better. When we say, okay, this is the kind of the group in terms of company size that we're targeting, this is the kind of specific, vertical that we're targeting. And then we see, okay, can we map specific pain points that we believe this type of companies have got with, the value that they can extract from our technology, and just try super, super narrow. And then what we notice is that basically even when you send, I don't know, an email, you try and be extremely highly personalized with the messaging, then you get a much better response because companies can actually relate to what you're saying. Like, we're getting kind of 20 to 25%, reply rate to our emails. It's just like, it's pretty good. So very, very happy with that. And not something that, we kind of experience when we're trying, to go really, really broad. But that's, again, you need to do a bit of research. But the good thing is that you can capture different signals if you try and stay really close to this company that you would want to kind of serve and help. Even say, okay, what is the applicant tracking that they're using? You can see that is live, what they're using. So you can say, okay, I know that if a company of this size is using this product, probably they have this set of problems. So how do we map that next to, what we can offer, from an integration perspective? And then you design something which is really, really specific and say, hey, I'm pretty sure that you might be experiencing something, along those lines. You want to have a conversation. We're keen to learn more. Maybe, it's not going to be relevant today, but maybe we can give you an opinion of things we observe with companies at similar stage, similar size, with similar pain points. And then we get these conversations going. And then again, the HR people community, they're extremely open to kind of share their pain, because again, it's the nature, of the role. And this is also related to the second point, which also we're thinking about in terms of additional pillar in addition to sales, which is building community, right? So we know they is extremely community driven. They talk to each other. They like to share best practices. So for us is, how do we kind of, now obviously we want to stay focused on the sales function because it makes sense. It's a natural way of ramping up fast. But then what's the next pillar? The next pillar has to be community because it makes so much sense. So how do you think today to build a community that can kind of stay focused on the specific needs that they are, express, right?
That's very good insight. And community is a huge part of most companies now, and thinking about not just their customers' community, but also internally helping them talk to each other. So maybe transitioning to the last topic before we start wrapping up is the future of work, in terms of the changes that we're going to expect permanently and the impact that's going to have in organizations. Maybe Mattias, you can start. Like, what are your thoughts about, what are you looking at within Moonfire to like invest in, because you fundamentally believe things will be different, and obviously Humaans is part of that investment strategy. But like, generally speaking, what do you see the impact of what's happened last year is going to change in the way you look for and areas of interest?
Yeah, no, totally. Look, all of these trends that we're talking about were happening pre the pandemic. And I think what the pandemic has done is exacerbated some of this stuff. So it's moved it even faster. So we've talked a lot about that. But, it's quite clear that the traditional way of looking at the workplace has been dismantled, right? How we work, where we work, when we work is just completely different today than it was before. And we've redefined it, and I think the concept of where the workplace is very much in question. And I think, we're going to be moving a lot more to work is maybe defined more about the culture, the vision, and the sort of united thinking that the group of people have together, more than necessarily this is where I work and this is, what I'm doing. And then, we talked about this a little bit about how the sort of handling and managing people is going to become a lot more important, and it becomes the heart of what an organization stands for and what it does. And also, key to its success. So we're moving from an HR function, which, I remember, when I started off working, it was literally a person who had an Excel spreadsheet, would sit in their own room usually, because everything they have is a sort of, very confidential information. And they were sort of this unique person that would come, and every once in a while you'd kind of meet them, right? And you tell them how many days holiday you had and whether you got paid or not, to a completely different function, which looks at people and sort of says, this is our main asset. Let's make sure we get the best ones into the organization. How do we manage and develop them? and train them, and how do we become an organization that really cares for them as well, because it's going beyond the training. It's going on, we want them to have a good physical and mental health as well. And then we have these other trends that are really interesting, like freelancers, that are coming up and growing. And probably, the UK is one of the fastest growing freelancer economies. And it's interesting because we want to have that freedom. And at the same time, we're also wanting to have a sense of purpose and belonging. And I think that software, again, can be really good at sort of bringing those really diverse thoughts together. And so I think there's going to be a whole new set of solutions out there to help us out. And then there's these other things that people are, I think, really, afraid of and worried about, around automation, and how that's taking away work. And my belief is, again, I've been saying this a few times in this podcast, that I think actually we're going to be working together with technology. It's not that technology is going to be replacing people. I think if we wanted to have people doing nothing, like that would have happened a long time ago, And so since the invention of fire, which helped improve our lives, enormously, to the industrial revolution, to the software revolution, I'm not working more. Unemployment, we've had an issue with COVID, but overall unemployment is super high. And I think we'll get back to that when we move into the industry. But what it does mean is that we need to adapt and we need to change, and how we work and where we work needs to be different. And then finally, on that too, continuous learning is also really important. And we're going to be, upskilling and reskilling. And this becomes, what used to be, something you did at university and you spent a lot of money on, and then, you went on with your life. Now, like maybe that money that you did spend and the time you did spend is not useful anymore. And actually, the work and the knowledge that you're building within the organization is going to become a lot more useful. So yeah, that's my little sort of view on the future of work.
Yeah, well, that's not little. I mean, that's quite a bit. And actually it does marry up with what I'm also experiencing. So Giovanni, I'm going to ask you the inverse of that question. So you're dealing with HR people every day, and they're being inundated by like 500 startups, all desperately trying to get their attention with different ideas, slightly tweaks of how to performance manage and all stuff. What are the areas that HR people are exhausted about? Like, what are the things that they're like, what, we're never going to do this. Like, it's just not going to work and we're just not going to implement. What are the areas that you think are overhyped?
I mean, something that is fun, like, is the fact that there's still a massive amount of manual work involved with a number of processes. And even if you have all this many point solution, the fact, again, going back to the kind of integration piece and the fact they don't talk to each other means that you need to kind of migrate data from kind of one system to another. And that's really painful. So the way we see is basically there are two components there. One is around the operational efficiency, and there's, build automation for this process. So you can move from the actual kind of, manual work and admin tasks to the actual value culture that you can build within the organization. And it's about how you build a better place of work. So it's kind of, shifting the role of the kind of, HR professional. So you have more time for strategy, more time for thinking, more time for building something better. And they can be related to, I don't know, for us, for example, do things in parallel, automate process, but also, build better analytics aspects like component. How do we leverage the data? If we are collecting all this data, like, what do you do? Like, data should not be kind of, HR software should not be kind of a static container for all this data. It should help you come up with insights. And, we're investing in, gender pay gap analysis or diversity metrics, things that can really help you understand what's going on with your business, have kind of clarity, real time. You don't need any kind of, technical help, engineering support that needs to kind of extract data, slice and dice and ingest in a BI tool. And then you spend like, 2 months before you can actually understand what's going on. And this is basically something that can, change and enable people ops and teams to really say, okay, this can be much more strategic. And this is something that is kind of also fun because we're building a better company. So I don't know if that kind of addressed your point.
Yeah. So to me, just to add on to that point, like, I think it's really interesting what Giovanni says is, and it comes to, like, we really do want this automation to happen. I think it is something that makes us feel better and feel like we're able to achieve more. And, we talked about Pento earlier on, they're doing that in, again, it's a mutual company of ours with Seedcamp, but, they're doing that with payroll and just making sure there's less mistakes, making sure it's done seamlessly and quickly, and then there's, another solution that we've invested in, called Will It Pay, which is kind of similar, to Pento, but, freelancers, again, like they're independent, they're entrepreneurs on their own, and they need to be paid on time, and being a freelancer, you work for 30 days and it takes you maybe 30 to 60 days to get paid. But with Willa, you get paid immediately. And so again, like we talk about these whole lofty ideas, but the solutions that come are actually just, efficiency improvements that are sort of in some ways, furthering this and fueling this bigger change that's happening in the workplace.
Well, I appreciate that. And Giovanni, it's funny because I wanted to hear if there was like one specific thing that HR people were frustrated about, and the partially the cheeky reason behind that question was because like literally tail end of last year, I think I met at least 5 companies that were trying to solve the how to replace like the coffee talk part of like an organization. And I think that my view on the future of work is that there are just some things that are going to be hard to replicate. Like, it doesn't mean that you can't try to do that and that it doesn't integrate as part of a larger system. But it is an interesting sector. I agree with you, Mattias. Like, automation will only get you so far. You still ultimately cannot replace the human relationships. And I think that's what fundamentally makes Moonfire special as a fund, with your experience, and Giovanni, what you're building is super great as well, in the sense that you're helping people make sense out of all that chaos. So with that, I'm just going to ask you one last question, Mattias, just because I know you dropped it a little bit, but maybe this is just a parting opportunity to talk about some of the good news you want to share.
Yeah. So, we have raised our fund and we're a $60 million fund. It's our first fund, so it's really exciting, with a wonderful team on board. And I feel so grateful really for all the support that I've received from the community and people, like yourselves who've been out there helping us on our way. And yeah, we're just, we've made a bunch of investments over the last 12 months, as you do when you're raising and building at the same time. And so, yeah, it's really exciting to announce that, here we are with our new fund, and we are so excited to back the next generation of founders.
Excellent. Well, on that note, guys, thank you for joining me and the Seedcamp community that are listening to this. And we'll be sharing your details on the show notes for anybody who's interested in getting in touch. So until next time, guys, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Carlos. Bye.